Katharina, for your nice words, and I have been enjoying working with you for so many years, and I hope to continue in that way. Yeah, now it's time to introduce the next speaker, Nancy Hendry. But first I would like to say a few words about the subject, but very briefly only. So we have heard so many interesting speeches and contributions over the last day and today about various aspects of digital revolution. We learned a lot. Digital revolution and the impact on the society and on women in particular. And we have heard also about the incredible opportunities, but also about the challenges and the huge threats, which was also pointed out by Professor Kim just right now. So the next talk will address a specific phenomenon relating to the persistent vulnerability of women in our society and across the globe. And this phenomenon, which is called sextortion, has also been highlighted by the Me Too movement. So it's a specific form of gender-based violence. Who has heard about this term and notion? Please raise your hands. Is it something new for you? Okay, who has heard about it? Okay, who hasn't heard about it until today? Okay, at least quite some people, and even women haven't heard about it. So that's why I have to admit, even myself, I heard about it, but I didn't really know what it is. So, and you will also see in the talk that it can have different meanings and different forms. So maybe because we talk about the digital age, that people think it's linked to cyber crime, it's linked to cyber blackmailing. It can be seen in that way, but you will see from our speaker, it's a lot about abuse of power. So she will speak about another form mainly, abuse of power, sexual abuse and abuse of power. And which is not a recent problem, but it's an age-old problem. And this is even more serious, I would say so. I'm very happy to introduce our distinguished speaker, Nancy Hendry. She's Senior Advisor for the International Association of Women Judges. And Nancy is a graduate of Harvard University and Stanford Law School. I had to mention it because it's so distinguished. And she has had an impressive career as a lawyer, having worked in the public sector and also in the non-profit sector across the whole globe. And she has had a wide range of activities and projects. And I say this across the globe because I think also we talked a little bit beforehand. I think her background also from her parents and their education is very international. She was born in Beijing, yes, in China, during the time of the revolution. And I think you have also spent with your parents in foreign countries like Vietnam. So I think also from, from her education and from her personal life, she was kind of well prepared for her international career. So just to give you a few examples, she was General Counsel of the Peace Corps between 1996 and 2001, Vice President and Deputy General Counsel of the Public Broadcasting Service. She worked for the Children's Law Center. She has worked for a law firm. She was teaching as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University, and many things more. And a volunteer in Senegal, this I should not forget, also for the Peace Corps. But now, her most important activity right now, she has been Senior Advisor for the International Association of Women Judges since 2010, focusing on projects to address gender equality, improve the access to justice of women, and promote global leadership of women within the judiciary. And since 2010, she has led the work of the International Association of Women Judges on sextortion. So she is the one, it's a signature initiative of this association, And I think it's due to Nancy that this phenomenon is now known, better known across the world. She laid the groundwork concerning the definition, concerning collection of data, giving training courses across the world, developing programs, and in particular raising awareness about this phenomenon in many, many countries of this world. So thank you very much for this important work, and without further ado, I would like to give you the floor for your speech.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Margarete, for that overly generous introduction. I do also have to recognize the role all my colleagues have played in getting us to this point. But it really is an honor and great pleasure to have this opportunity to talk about sextortion.
I just want to close
this so I'm not...
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Better? Sextortion, an issue that remains a barrier to achieving the ethical and inclusive future that this Congress envisions. We certainly will not solve the challenges of the 2030 Agenda without the full and visible participation of women. However, as important as it is to focus on women's inclusion in new technologies, I believe one of the most significant barriers women face is not a product of the fourth industrial revolution, but one that predates the first one. So to move forward, we also need to look back and take steps to address a global problem that disproportionately affects women and constrains their rights and opportunities in almost every domain. And of course, that problem is sextortion. So what exactly do we mean by it? Some of you are familiar with the term, others not. When someone demands money in exchange for something within his power to confer or withhold, we readily recognize the payment as a bribe and the conduct as corrupt. But what if the demand is for sex rather than cash? This was the question posed by judges oceans apart about superficially very different circumstances in which officials were abusing women with seeming impunity. In Uganda, magistrates were concerned that prison officials were demanding sex from the wives of prisoners in exchange for delivering life-saving medication. In Central America, we heard about judges who were troubled by reports that border guards were demanding sex from women seeking to cross the border and travel north. In a moment of clarity, the International Association of Women Judges realized that these concerns were not particular to an official, a sector, or a country, but part of a broader pattern involving abuse of power in exchange for sex. The pattern was clear, but the problem was that there was no recognized term to describe it. Was it a corruption offense? It's certainly corrupt for an official to exercise entrusted authority for private gain. But anti-corruption laws generally contemplate economic harm. Was it a sexual offense? There's certainly a sexual component, but gender-based violence laws often treat consent as a defense, even under inherently coercive circumstances. The perpetrator may wield extraordinary power over the victim's future or livelihood, but without a knife to her throat or a gun to her head, it may be seen as a consensual bargain, not a crime. So it is difficult to discuss, let alone analyze and develop strategies to address, an abuse we cannot even name. So the IAWJ chose the term sextortion to underscore that abusing a position of authority to extort sex is not only a form of sexual abuse, but also a form of corruption. one in which sex, rather than money, is the currency of the bribe. Sextortion has 4 key elements. First, the perpetrator is someone who exercises entrusted authority. Second, he abuses that authority by exercising it in exchange for personal benefit. Third, that personal benefit takes the form of a sexual favor. And finally, the sexual favor is obtained through the coercive power of authority rather than physical violence or force. Although sextortion has a disproportionate impact on women, men and LGBTQ individuals may also be victims. The power imbalance is what is key. Recently, in fact, a Norwegian politician was convicted of abusing his power to force 3 young men to have sex with him. He convinced the men that their future, either deportation or permanent residency, depended on their response to his sexual demands. You may also find the term sextortion used to describe a form of cyber blackmail, one in which sexual information or images, often obtained by sexting, are then used to extort sexual favors from the victim. In fact, my friend Shirani mentioned this cybercrime in her presentation yesterday. But don't be confused. One form of sextortion involves abuse of entrusted authority. The other does not. One, however, relies on technology. The other does not. One is a new name for an age-old problem. The other is a new name for a computer age problem. And their implications for the 4th Industrial Revolution are also different. Like other forms of corruption, sextortion has far-reaching implications for the 2030 Agenda and its goals relating to gender equity and human rights, transparency and accountability, democratic governance and the rule of law, economic prosperity, peace, and security. Cyber sextortion, on the other hand, underscores the risks that technology poses for privacy and the many ways in which it can be used to victimize women. So sextortion as a form of corruption is a global phenomenon that takes many forms: sex for grades, sex for a job, sex for access to basic government services or humanitarian aid. But the net effect is that at each step, when a woman's welfare and opportunities hang in the balance, she may confront a sextortion demand. That was certainly the case of a Colombian woman who applied for a green card to work in the United States. After her interview, the immigration officer called and hinted he had the power to deny her green card and even deport her relatives. He asked her to meet him in his car. She did so, and he told her, "I want sex, 1 or 2 times, that's all. You get your green card. You won't have to see me anymore." She had secretly recorded his demand, and so he eventually pled guilty to receiving a bribe, official misconduct, sexual misconduct, and coercion. So in that particular case, the official was held accountable. But how many other cases go unreported? In fact, this particular official handled some 8,000 green card applications in his 3-year tenure in that position. In some African countries, sextortion is so prevalent in schools that people refer to STDs, sexually transmitted degrees. Students are often asked to pay bribes in the form of sex in return for better grades. And in fact, particularly during a student's final year, there are teachers who deliberately fail students to force them to, quote, negotiate for better grades. The problem is not just that sextortion is pervasive, but that too often we turn a blind eye. The BBC reported that international aid workers in Syria were demanding sexual favors in exchange for humanitarian assistance. The exploitation was so widespread that some Syrian women were refusing to go to distribution centers because people would assume that they had offered their bodies in exchange for any aid they might bring home. And nothing was being done to address it. The excuse offered was that it was the only way to get aid into dangerous parts of Syria. Just think about what this says about the decision-making, that sexual abuse was seen as an acceptable price to pay for delivering aid, especially when the aid was not in fact reaching many of the female recipients. So the needs and sectors differ, but the pattern is the same. Someone in a position of power preys on the vulnerability of others to coerce compliance with sexual demands. Tech companies are not immune, and unless we address sextortion, women will continue to find that opportunities are either blocked or available only at an unconscionable price. For too long, sextortion remained what I like to call a problem hidden in plain sight. People knew it existed, but they didn't talk about it. There was a culture of silence. We didn't have a name for sextortion, so it wasn't part of the conversation about corruption or gender-based violence. It wasn't a focus of research or compliance efforts. And what we don't look for or gather information about, in the end, we don't see and we don't take steps to address. So we didn't draft laws or codes of conduct that specifically addressed sextortion. And we didn't really seek to hold perpetrators accountable. Impunity was the rule, and cases such as the one involving the immigration officer, the exception. Women were excluded, disempowered, and harmed. But things are beginning to change. The Me Too movement, which others have also talked about, has shown a new light on the power dynamic behind a broad range of sexual abuses, including sextortion, and created an opportune global moment to address them. Women are breaking their silence. They're coming forward with allegations about the ways in which men in positions of great power have abused that power for purposes of sexual exploitation. Sextortion is gaining visibility and prominence in the anti-corruption discourse. In Buenos Aires last year, some of you played a role in getting the B20, C20, and W20 to adopt a statement on why gender matters in anti-corruption, a statement that specifically acknowledged sextortion as a form of corruption that disproportionately affects women. That was very important, and it was disappointing that this idea met resistance in the more recent meeting in Japan. But returning to a more positive note, we hope that will change in the future. And in the meantime, the declaration adopted at the International Anti-Corruption Conference in Copenhagen last year recognized that gendered corruption, including sextortion, is an aggravated type of corruption that deepens gender inequality, hinders the empowerment of women, and constitutes a clear violation of human rights. It urged the mainstreaming of gender perspectives in anti-corruption public policy, design, implementation, and monitoring. So a huge step forward for the anti-corruption community. We are also beginning to gather data about sextortion. The recently released Global Corruption Barometer report for Latin America and the Caribbean is the first time that Transparency International has systematically tried to collect information about sextortion. And of course, what did it reveal? It confirms that it is a significant problem, finding that 1 in 5 people has either experienced sextortion or knows someone who has. When the Stockholm International Water Institute and UNDP looked at corruption in the water sector, they specifically asked focus groups in Johannesburg and Bogota about sextortion. In both cities, participants had, of course, experienced solicitation of sexual favors from water utility staff. I've also heard that the Council of Europe's anti-corruption monitoring body is starting to include sextortion in its questions to states, but not surprisingly finding that states are not yet collecting these data. The absence of specific laws remains a challenge in combating sextortion. Cases have to be brought under statutes that encompass sextortion conduct but call it by a different name: corruption, bribery, breach of trust, extortion, sexual harassment. And the result is often an imprecise fit. To remedy this problem, the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir has actually adopted a law targeting sextortion, to my knowledge, the first of its kind. In September, the International Bar Association released a report on sextortion, highlighting the gaps in existing legal frameworks and recommending adoption of laws that target sextortion. In fact, the IBA president issued a call to action, saying abuse of power takes many forms, and it is time we recognized sextortion as one of them. Sexual exploitation is a global issue that is shamefully underrepresented as a criminal practice in law. This needs to change. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime has launched a global judicial integrity network, which is considering how judicial codes of conduct and training might better address sextortion and other gender-related integrity issues. This is important, especially in the absence of clear legal standards. Abusing power for personal benefit is a fundamental breach of the ethical standards to which those entrusted with power are typically held. And establishing clear expectations and standards, I believe, can help to change institutional cultures and provide greater accountability. However, as the experience of UN peacekeepers in Haiti reveals, even when the standard seems clear, there may be room for confusion. In the wake of a major earthquake, the UN found that more than 225 Haitian women had engaged in, quote, transactional sex. They didn't have the term sextortion, but with peacekeepers to obtain things like food and medication. Although the UN Code of Conduct flatly prohibits exchange of assistance for sex, the report found, quote, confusion on the ground and noted staff's view that people should have romantic rights. Does anyone seriously believe that a woman who engages in sex to obtain food is engaging in a romantic relationship? If she were offering money instead, would anyone construe that as a voluntary gift or fail to see it as corrupt? So from a corruption standpoint, the abuse of authority and the toll it takes on transparency, accountability, and good governance is the same, whether someone is obliged to pay in cash or with sexual favors. The difference, of course, is that the harm is not financial and it is deeper and more lasting when the currency of the bribe is sex. I'm continually struck by the universality of sextortion. You take something as basic as public housing for low-income women, and you can find examples of sextortion in countries as disparate as Zimbabwe, Israel, and the United States. And it's not just access to government services. Sextortion can be found in virtually every sector. Nor is it only low-income women who suffer, but anyone whose welfare or future depends on the favor of someone who wields authority. It is because sextortion is so pervasive that I believe it is so urgent to address it. How can we hope to achieve the 2030 agenda as long as sextortion limits the aspirations, opportunities, and inclusion of so many? One of the conference themes has been the importance of looking at issues from a different perspective, one that focuses on gender. And of course, that has been the fundamental insight about sextortion, the need to bring a gender perspective to corruption. And I'm really heartened by the efforts that are taking place to do that. However, as we confront the new challenges of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, I do hope that we will not lose sight of the age-old problem of sextortion. Thank you so very much.